Okay. So the point is in earthquake and for any lateral load resistance, you need to have these vertical members which are essentially there to support the vertical load, gravity load, static condition, but they also have to participate in the resistance to loads coming in horizontal plane, loads or deformation in horizontal plane transfers to their axis, and that can be done only by virtue of flexure. So these, if it is the column, if the dimensions are comparable, both cross-section dimensions are comparable to each other, same order of magnitude, then you call it beam column. But if the cross-section dimensions are such that one direction is very long in comparison with the other cross-section, then that is actually a shear wall. That's a deep beam. It's like a very deep beam in a vertical deep beam, but because it is also going to support the vertical load, so it is also a column. So this terminology of wide column, that is made popular by the softwares. Probably this is the terminology used in Stat Pro, right? You model shear wall as a wide column because they do not have a different element to model shear wall behavior per se, but they do have beam column element, frame element, which can do that axial deformation as well as bending. So all that you need to do is maybe make it very deep, so it's very wide, so you call it a wide column. And I'm not really aware of what is the formulation of that element, but my hunch would be that shear deformations would also be incorporated if they are modeling it as a beam element. So both flexure and shear deformations would be incorporated in that formulation. So it's only I would say wide column or a deep beam. Technically it is a deep beam, but it also carries the axial load, vertical load. There is no way you can prevent vertical load going to the shear wall. It is integrated with the rest of this structural skeleton, so it has to participate in vertical load carrying action as well. But the terminology of wide column is essentially software driven. So,
Okay, so like the actual origin of shear wall is from the deep beam concept. It has virtually no relation to that of the columns.
yes, it is the very high flexural rigidity that it offers by virtue of its depth. Right? So, it's a BD cube. So, if you see, D runs into meters while the width of the beam is only in millimeters.
Yes, sir,
Right?
yes.
So, maybe 250 that's the width of the shear wall. Probably 230 actually. That's the one big thick wall that you would have. So that would accommodate one shear wall. So that's the typical width, typical wall thickness we talk about. But the depth would range into it could go in meters. So you can imagine the amount of flexural rigidity this adds to the system in the lateral resistance.
Okay,
Right?
sir.
So any other question? Okay, so we were talking about the enhancing the energy dissipation. energy dissipation in the section. So you have spatial detailing. All this is done by spatial considerations for reinforcement detailing in RC structure, and in case of steel structures it is essentially connection details, and incorporation of target weak zones in steel frames. Weak zones, we will come to that towards the end of this course when we discuss the steel structures. They essentially, most of the, how do you look at it? There is the flexural resistance of the steel structure actually comes from the flange. This is the web, this is used for the shear resistance, and bending is essentially contributed by this flange, right? So what is done is part of this flange is removed. If I look at it, okay, so that's the, I would say this is elevation, this is side view, and maybe if I can draw this plan, then I would see material being removed from the flange. So something like this, right? So this is how it will look like, elevation, this is side view, and this is plan, right? So this is first angle projection, I would say. So now at the end of the beam, these are the material that is taken out. So the flange area which is available for resisting flexure is reduced here. So this is called reduced section. And the moment capacity at these points is the minimum. So the flexural strength of the beam is minimum at this point, wherever you have the maximum reduction. And accordingly, the plastic hinge initiation would happen at this point, and the joint and the column would be spared. The plasticity, inelastic deformations would begin to accumulate at these two points. And that is the basic idea of creation of target weak zone in steel frames. That's how we ensure ductile failure of the flexural system. Otherwise the entire beam is same. It's very difficult unless you make other sections very strong by adding plates to increase their flexural stiffness. So this is a very convenient way, and the geometry is well defined. You can just cut off by a flame cutter the appropriate segment from the flange, and use that reduced beam section for as a beam in the steel frame, right? So this is how it is done. So essential requirement is the enhancing energy dissipation. Now another important part that we need to look at is, where was I doing? Capacity design is fine. Another important part that we need to look for, ensure, I remember a TV commercial, old TV commercial, as I talk about this. I need to see you while talking about this. Have you heard of, have you ever seen that TV commercial? It used to be aired on Doordarshan, Anikta Mein Ekta. Or at least you might have read this story during your primary school or preparatory school, primary school text. There is strength in unity.
Yes, sir.
Right? So essentially is the basic idea is individual. If the story goes like, if you try to take out one stick, it is very easy to break it by bending it. But if you tie a number of sticks together, then they become very strong, and you cannot break it by bending simply, right? So that's the basic example that is cited for pushing forth that idea of strength in unity. And that is more or less, so I would say this versus a bundle let's say we tie it and then try to bend it, right? So obviously this is weak, this is strong, right? You agree with this?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So that is what we do in building plan as well. So if I draw a typical, consider a typical building plan, there would be columns along the grid lines. Let us have the grid line. Okay. So now, if the columns are not tied together, then each of them actually bends like a single stick and doesn't offer much of a resistance. But if I ensure that all of these columns are actually restrained or constrained to move together, right? That each column under the influence of lateral deformation or force, if each of these columns is forced to move by the same amount, right, then we are looking at some kind of this combination. All of them are participating in the action resistance mechanism together, right? So then it offers much stronger resistance, and this is done by what we call as diaphragm action. Diaphragm action of floor slab. So if we have monolithic reinforced concrete slab which is cast monolithically with beams and columns, then it will ensure that all the columns will move by the same amount under the influence of this lateral load. And when that happens, then you have this concept of all of these sticks being tied together to deform together, to respond in a coherent manner or coordinated manner to the applied load, to the applied deformation. And that leads to a very strong system, right? So then if this diaphragm action, so there are two kinds of diaphragm that we can have depending on the material and the style of construction. So one is what I just described to you, rigid floor diaphragm. And second one is flexible diaphragm. So in rigid floor diaphragm, each lateral force resisting element takes force in proportion to its stiffness. Very natural, because each of these resisting elements, each of these lateral load resisting feature or element, they are forced to move by the same amount. So all of them are subjected to the same deformation. And if the stiffness of these elements is different, then the total force that is generated in each of these elements is going to be proportional to its individual stiffness. And therefore, large portion, if it is a frame and shear wall construction, then and it is integral, then a large portion, a massive portion of the load is actually taken by shear wall. The frames are actually the columns of the moment resistant frames, they are actually spared of much of the earthquake load that they need to participate in resisting, right? So bulk of the work is done, the heavy lifting is done by the shear wall if it is there, and shear wall elements, and a very small portion is actually resisted by the moment resistant frame in the system. Flexible diaphragm, on the other hand, if there is no such mechanism that the deformation is identical, right? So I would say all elements undergo same deformation. right? So if all elements undergo same deformation, then that is a rigid floor diaphragm, and each lateral force resisting element takes force in proportion to its individual stiffness. And on the contrary, if the flooring system is such that the equality of deformation is not enforced, which is quite possible when you have a flooring which is on the basis of made of some kind of wooden planks or so on, right? So हाँ डिमरी जी, हाँ भेज दीजिए. So if the deformations are not same, for example in the case of if the flooring is made of flexible material, not so rigid material, as rigid as reinforced concrete, then the individual elements take the force in case of by virtue of tributary area. Proportional force, or rather I would say load distribution. So tributary area, you are all familiar with tributary area. That's how you distribute gravity loads on individual beams, if you recall. So it's the same concept, except that we are looking at distribution of the horizontal load. Then how much is the tributary area corresponding to each structural element, lateral load resisting element, and it takes load in proportion to that tributary area associated with each element. So that is what is what happens if you are dealing with flexible diaphragm. But mostly in Indian context, we do not have flexible diaphragms. Most of the buildings are actually based on rigid floor diaphragm. Reinforced concrete flooring system is very convenient otherwise also from several angles. Thermal, heat resistance and fire resistance and so on. So you generally have rigid floor diaphragms, and in that case the lateral force will be carried on, lateral force that is taken up by each element, each of the vertical elements is going to be proportional to its own individual stiffness. And if it is a frame shear wall structure, then a Lyons portion is taken up by the shear wall. Now coming to this earlier discussion, I took a detour in between to discuss this diaphragm action. So energy dissipation is the key for developing seismic resilience in the structure. So what is the effect of this? The idea is, even for what is the intensity of earthquake that we classify as a design basis earthquake for which the structure is designed, we do not expect the structure to remain undamaged when this kind of earthquake or earthquake of that severity actually occurs in the region, or building is subjected to that kind of motion, right? So in that scenario, what we actually do is elastic design. All our design procedures are elastic, based on elastic theories. Elastic analysis is all that we do in all our structural analysis for design purposes. So we perform elastic design for a reduced seismic demand, right? And the amount of reduction is controlled by a factor known as response reduction factor. Response, because seismic response of your analytical model is the seismic demand that the earthquake puts on the structure, and that has to be provided for. Seismic response reduction factor, often denoted by the factor R. Right, so I will add one slide in between. So I had mentioned earlier this response reduction factor is contributed by three aspects to this. It's a combined representation of basically three different independent things. Let me outline this. Overstrength, redundancy, and ductility. What do you mean by overstrength? Any ideas?
I may try, sir.
Yeah, sure.
In working stress method, we generally increase the capacity of the member by 33.1/3%. That can be termed as overstrength.
No, not that.
So the presence of redundant members in the system.
No, that redundancy is a separate thing. Right?
So in case of
Overstrength is the basic procedure of design. Whenever you design a section, you come up with certain requirement of reinforcement, isn't it? Certain area of steel that is required for achieving a particular moment of resistance for the section. But that exact area you will never be able to get. You will always provide somewhat more than what is required, because that is what is possible by the available diameter of the reinforcing bars and whatever the combination of reinforcing bars you may have. So you will always have area of steel that you actually provide would be somewhat greater than the area of steel that is required in a section for a specified moment of resistance that you need to achieve, target moment of resistance, right? So that extra area of steel that you are providing, what is it doing? It is actually doing contributing, adding more to the strength of the section, which is not really accounted for in your anywhere in the calculation, right? So that is what we are referring to as overstrength. Redundancy is of course the alternate load paths. If the plastic hinge develops, capacity is demand equals capacity in a certain location, so the plastic hinge develops, and then the load other section begin to other mechanisms would take over in resisting the load until the global collapse mechanism forms. So that is the redundancy. And finally the ductility. Even after the plastic hinge develops, the yield capacity has been achieved. So instead of having a brittle failure like this, we would try to prolong this plateau, right? So try to have high ductility in the member. So that is what is referred to as ductility. So all these three, overstrength, redundancy and ductility, they are all independent of each other, and although in a same structure, so it is the combined representation of this is what is represented as response reduction factor, and this will be your next assignment, home assignment, that you need to find out what is the sensitivity of response reduction factor. It is actually dependent on natural period of the system, ductility and the natural period of the system. So R mu T variation, how does this response reduction factor varies with respect to time period for a given amount of ductility, right? So once you have this basic code of response spectrum computation ready, then you will need to work out this nonlinear response spectrum, and then figure out how much is the ratio between elastic response spectrum and inelastic response spectrum that you will compute for a specified ductility, and then figure out what is the relationship between R mu T. In general, it is not a constant, but as seismic design codes try to simplify things so that it is implemented unambiguously, IS 1893 R is considered to be constant across Tn in IS 1893. Mu of course changes, mu, or I should say it depends on mu. Dependence on available ductility is governed by a tabular classification on of different structural types. So what kind of structural system are we dealing with? Is it ordinary moment resistant frame, or is it a special moment resisting frame with ductile detailing, so that you will have a different amount of ductility in both the cases, or whether you are using a steel frame or whether you are using a shear wall structure, and so on. You will, I mean, all these factors would be affecting the choice of R. So based on the available ductility as defined by the different structural types, you choose a value of R, and that value of R is held constant across different natural period. You don't really change the value of R or the response reduction factor for if the natural period of the building or structural system changes, which will happen if you just change the height of the building, right? With increasing height, the natural period will keep on increasing. So even for the same structural type, if you change the height of the building, the natural period will change. So R is still kept constant, and primarily that is only to ensure that to avoid confusion, try to minimize complexity of the code such that it can be implemented correctly and interpreted unambiguously. But theoretically speaking, R depends on all of these factors: overstrength, redundancy and ductility, and it cannot be same across all situations. Even it may be different at the different sections within the same member, right? So this is this exercise will be your next homework problem. So be prepared for that, and this is very crucial for earthquake resistant design, because all that we will perform seismic analysis for elastic system based on the design spectrum. All that value response computation, those will be scaled down by this factor R, and that reduced force, reduced seismic demand will be considered for combination with will be considered for in the load combination that we have for structural design, earthquake load combined with the dead load and live load, and then provide for the section reinforcement as required based on the whatever is the critical load combination and whatever is the critical demand, right? So that is the basic process. So I'll stop here. I mean, any questions? We can have discussions now. Any questions? Any issues with this response reduction factor concept?
Sorry, but I understand the concept, but I didn't know what to do with the assignment. What we are going to do with the assignment.
भाई अभी तो जो अभी असाइनमेंट है वो पूरा कीजिए. The statement of the problem will be given to you after you complete the first assignment. Don't tell me that you are not aware of the first assignment.
Yes.
You are aware of the first assignment, isn't it?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Okay, fine. So first take care of the first assignment, because you will need that in order to have a go at the second assignment problem, which will be based on nonlinear response spectrum, inelastic design spectrum as it is called. Right. So what we do essentially is, by taking into account the eventuality of inelastic response of the system by virtue of ductility, we reduce the elastic design spectrum and compute the reduced seismic loads on the system, and then design the section for that reduced seismic load to behave in elastic range. And then we provide, we take care of the adequate detailing, reinforcement detailing, and whatever is the prescriptive, whatever is the prescription for good seismic performance or good seismic detailing. So to ensure that our assumption for reducing the response predicated on the presumed inelastic behavior and availability of ductility actually is ensured, right? we will get the amount of ductility that we are assuming in the structure during our design calculations, and those kind of care has to be taken in preparing construction drawings as well as while execution of those drawings on the site, at the site, right? Because these things will not figure in the calculation. How we design or how we provide the ductility, how we enhance the ductility of the section, that will never figure in your calculation. That can only be implemented by the careful detailing of the reinforcement or the connection and the structural members, and then taking care that whatever is drawn on the construction drawing is actually replicated at the site. Any other question? No questions? About rigid floor diaphragms, about flexible diaphragms? Okay, fine. We'll stop here. Thank you, everyone.